Welcome to the 2 Degrees C Climate Chat Podcast, your weekly guide to what's happening within the climate around the world. My name is Neil Vinnykerk, the Executive Director and a founding member of 2 Degrees C. Along with co-founders Dr. Carsten Schein and Jenny Dissen, we cover issues relating to the climate crisis. So join us as we explore in the 2 Degrees C Climate Chat. Hi everyone, welcome back to the 2 Degrees C Climate Chat Podcast. Today, joining me again, Dr. Carsten Schein and Dr. Kristi Foster, the Executive Director of the Tillamook Estuaries Partnership. Got that right, this time at least. Welcome everyone. Carsten, before we go too deep into Kristi's work, I wanted to ask you today if you could perhaps frame the estuarine environment as far as the climate conversation goes. How does this fit in? How do estuaries fit in?
Well, estuaries are super important to the whole climate equation. They are home to some ecosystems that sequester a lot of carbon, and they act a bit as a filter for a lot of what's running through the hydrologic cycle. So yeah, they've got a lot of importance to understanding and addressing climate.
So, Kristi, maybe you can introduce yourself and what you're doing out in the Tillamook area.
Sure. So I've been here for about 5 years in Tillamook County, and I come with a pretty broad background. I've worked in the petrochemical industry because I started off as a chemical engineer, and then I went back to school and became a marine biologist and oceanographer. So I kind of completely switched my career path. And my background is in coral reef ecology, and that's how I got to do a lot of research in ecosystems and begin working with citizen science. And I've moved over to Tillamook County, Oregon in 2016, and I have been part of the Tillamook Estuary Partnership since then. So I started off as the education and community engagement coordinator and became the executive director after a couple of years when an opening became available. So Tillamook Estuaries Partnership is actually one of 28 locations in the National Estuary Program. This is an EPA program from the Environmental Protection Agency, and it is under the mandate of the Clean Water Act. So it kind of, even though we have funding from the EPA, we are not a governmental agency. We are a nonprofit organization, and we look at trying to provide healthy habitats, healthy watersheds for our thriving community, which is very small. We are a rural community with more cows than people.
I love that. So tell us now, what is the makeup of this estuarine environment? What's going on there that makes this so important?
Well, an estuary is where the river meets the sea. So we actually look at the bigger picture. We're not looking at just the estuary, we're looking at the entire watershed. So that goes all of the land area where the water flows over it into the rivers and then down to the sea. So it is probably, an estuary is one of the most productive ecosystems that exists. And what I mean by that is that it has some of the some of the thickest and most dense and variety of plant life. So by productivity, we mean plant productivity, lots and lots of carbon intake and lots of oxygen output. It is incredibly important because it is the breeding and rearing grounds of fish. We have, where I live, we are in a mountainous range, so we also have a lot of forest land. So we have incredible elk and deer and all sorts of other wildlife. Migratory birds come through here and use the estuaries as their stopover points between their migration between north and south during every year. and our fish life and shellfish life is amazing. And then also in Tillamook, what we're known for is also our cows. So we have incredible dairy industry here as well, and they thrive here. We have some of the best ice cream and cheese that you can find.
So am I right in saying that this would be not only ecologically important species, but also economically important species, especially ocean species? Is that correct?
Incredibly. The reason why Tillamook Bay was nominated and accepted as one of the bays of national significance in the United States is because of our salmon population. We are one of the largest areas for salmon breeding and fishing in our bay. And so that is incredibly important from an economic viewpoint. One of our other bays, as well as Tillamook Bay, but Netarts Bay, is known for its oysters. And so we provide that and other shellfish, oysters, clams, cockles, gapers. The shellfish industry is incredibly important to us. Because of the high level of oysters in Netarts Bay, we're also known for our salt because it's some of the cleanest water that you can have in any bays. And one of our industries is to extract the salt from there because it's of the purest, best quality.
Wow.
We have dairy industry, we have lumber industry, and because just of our location between the mountains and the ocean, we also have tourist industry. So our estuaries are incredibly important to us economically.
So how does that estuarine environment compare to other environments around the world? Because, I mean, here in Florida where I am, we have, mangroves and seagrass beds, but what do we see out where you are?
So where we are, we have a lot of Pacific Northwest type trees. So we're not going to have the mangroves here. We're going to have all kinds of Sitka sedge, Sitka spruce, eelgrass beds. We have kelp forests out in the ocean. And so we have grasslands. We actually have violet fields. So quite a bit different. And even as you go around to the different national estuary programs in the United States, each one has their own benefits and concerns. Certainly what we have going on here, because we're so small as far as a population, is different from the challenges that go on just a little bit north of us in Portland for the lower Columbia. Their river system has different challenges because of all of the different industries. Puget Sound is different. The folks in Florida experience different things along Indian River Lagoon and temperature related incidents. So each location has its own needs and different projects that people work on to try to help improve those systems. But we're looking at trying to do that across the nation and certainly across the world, because this is where our fish come from, the fish that we eat. It's where we recreate. And so there's a lot of not only economic, but also intrinsic value to our estuaries and the surrounding areas.
Gotcha. And Carson, you mentioned this in the beginning, but there's an effect of carbon sequestration that's occurring. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that, and so the listeners can understand what that actually means.
So yeah, sure. In any in the Earth system, there's a constant cycle of carbon. When we burn wood or fossil fuels and such, carbon makes its way into the atmosphere. It's then used by plants, for example, and some animals to convert that carbon, pull that carbon out, and store it as dry matter as it grows. So things like seagrasses, the eelgrass that Kristi mentioned, kelp forests and such, they're incredibly good at pulling this carbon out of the atmosphere, transforming it into plant material, and then basically fixing it in place so it's out of the system for a while, and eventually it will wind up in the soils as those plants decompose, and hopefully the soil becomes carbon rich instead of and it's not burned and put back into the atmosphere. The oceans as well, good source, a good sink for carbon dioxide is being absorbed into the water and sequestered, stored away.
So is it fair to say that it's not only important not to be emitting the carbon dioxide, but it's also important to be absorbing it? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Described barefoot luxury, the casually sophisticated Southern Cross Club is Little Cayman's original resort. This hidden gem is as unique and vibrant as the island it inhabits. A true island treasure, it is the perfect place to dive, fish, and relax. Its 14 beachfront bungalows are situated on 900 feet of white sand, only minutes from the world-class diving found only in Little Cayman. Visit www.southerncrossclub.com to book your escape to tranquility.
Hey, this is Megan Haney-Greer, freediver, ocean explorer, and marine educator. Also, the imperfect conservationist. You're listening to the 2 Degrees C Climate Chat podcast.
So, Kristi, these marine estuarine environments, how do they compare, or how do protections in the US compare to other parts of the world? And, do you see particular benefits here or threats in other places that are strong concerns?
I think they're kind of at risk around the globe, just because anything that's happening on the land will flow through that watershed and end up in the estuaries and beaches. And so anything we're doing is going to impact that. The nice thing about the National Estuary Program in the United States is that for those 28 locations that we have, we're paying particular attention to those bays of national significance. And we're trying to have concerted efforts related to habitat restoration, water quality, and then just raising the awareness of our residents and visitors on the importance of these so that people can learn more about it, care more about it, and hopefully do more to protect it. So I'd say overall, they're all at risk, and we kind of have to make a concerted effort to try to tone down some of the negative impacts that are happening to them.
And in Tillamook, are there opportunities that are presented for non-scientists to participate in the protections?
We have a great program. Tillamook Estuaries Partnership is really small. We only have a few employees, and so we rely on more than 100 volunteers every single year to help us out. And I can tell you about a couple of those programs. Probably our longest running one is our volunteer water quality monitoring program. And this has been going on for more than 20 years. And we have between 10 and 12 citizen scientist volunteers who we've trained, who go out every 2 weeks and take water quality samples and bring them back to our very small lab. And we run bacteria analysis on it. Our concern in our water quality, more than various nutrients, is bacteria because of our dairy farms and septic systems and just general wildlife that could contribute bacteria to the water quality. And some of our volunteers have actually been participating for that entire 20-year period. So wow. It's really pretty amazing. And we do the analysis on the bacteria. We post those results within 2 days. Normally we'd love to do it sooner, but there is a sample preparation and testing time that requires at least 24 hours. And we post that on an online map so that people who want to recreate then in the waterways can check and see what the water quality is, so they know they're going into a healthy and safe environment before they do that. So that's one of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so you would put a high value at that, those in situ data that's being collected by those citizen scientists.
Yes, actually, we have a shared position with our Department of Environmental Quality, who is our water resource manager. And he was able to take that data and prove to the regulatory agency that this is valid, high quality data. And he used that to establish the status and trends in our local streams and waterways, and to develop our local total maximum daily loads for bacteria. So the regulations in our area are based on our citizen science data.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it's just it's a kind of a shining star example within our National Estuary Program of a long-term citizen science program. Our biggest opportunity for citizen scientists is at our native plant nursery. We have this wonderful program where we have a location where we are growing over 30 different species of trees, shrubs, and flowering plants and grasses that will be used for habitat restoration projects by more than 40 partners up and down the northern coast of Oregon, so across 8 different counties. And this program was put together because our closest major source of plant material would be from the Portland and Willamette Valley area, which is on the other side of the mountain range. So those specific plants aren't genetically adapted to live and thrive on the coast, where we have to think about different temperature ranges and salt in our air, so what we would find is that when we would use those plants, the survivability would be less. Now, when we're growing and using our coastally adapted plants, we have upwards of 90% survival. So it's not only better because the plants are taking off and not being overgrown or outcompeted with by exotics or invasive species, but then we don't have to go back and replant. So it's a really good thing for our restoration projects. And we rely on hundreds of volunteers throughout the year to help us at our nursery. This would be with transplanting, sowing seeds actually in the little tubes, watching them grow, helping us do health surveys, weeding and just caring for the health of the plants when they get a little bit larger, transplanting them to larger pots, and just continuing to allow these plants to grow and thrive. We keep them for anywhere between 1 to 3 years, depending on the species. And so we'll have over 100,000 plants at our nursery. And in addition to that, then we have to go out and get seeds, native seeds from our locations to grow the next round of crops. And so we actually have a program with 8 different partners called Explore Nature. And this is a series of guided walks, hikes, paddles, and stewardship activities that we try to help connect people with the restoration work we do and the recreation that they enjoy. And so we have programs that we call seed detectives. And so we will get volunteers to come with us and we will train them on the identification of the species. And there are actually very specific protocols for seed collection. You don't want to collect more than a certain amount from any one plant because you want to still leave the seed there to do its own thing in its own place. We have to get from a certain number of different plants so that we get the largest genetic mix. And so we teach them these protocols, we teach them identifications, and then we have a wonderful day of it outside collecting seed. We take it back and we'll have folks help us with the preparation and just getting it ready for sowing it at a later date. So all the way from seed collection to propagation and just general taking care of the plants, we rely on quite a few volunteers every year. Another nice aspect of that is just not only are you doing the science and helping us with the restoration, but there's a large sociological benefit for it too. Our plant nursery is right next door to the Oregon Youth Authority. And so we have incarcerated youth next door and we use them as our work crew to help us. So the volunteers get to interact with the youth. They're in their final year of incarceration and about to be released. So they're getting to learn some career-connected learning opportunities. They're getting to interact with the people they'll be living next to within a year. And it's really a great way of mixing both the science and the sociology and just the general neighborliness of helping each other make the habitats improve and helping the plants grow and helping the fish and everything else.
That's really interesting. And I'm assuming that similar projects for seed collection and things are occurring at the other of the 28 areas that you mentioned before?
We are the only ones with a native plant nursery.
Oh, wow.
So
that does make it very important.
Yeah, they may grow for their own restoration projects, but they're not doing it on the scale that we're doing it. And so, yeah, that makes us really unique.
Very
A
good.
lot of them have more big city problems, whereas we're in a rural area, so we're able to do this sort of thing.
It does sound though like the citizen science projects that you're running are a win-win situation, in that you get a lot of value from the data and from the seeds and such that the volunteers are collecting, and they get to learn a lot about what you do in terms of the science with their contributions. So that's really a neat thing, and something that's very worthwhile.
You bring up a good point there, because I was going to ask you, Carsten, how do you see that this information, contributing to climate adaptation? How can we associate those two together?
Well, certainly the just this simply the data that is being collected, the efforts that a lot of these citizen scientists are putting in, that has immense value to ecological restoration. It has immense value to scientific analysis, to understand how conditions, for example, are changing. Without those citizen science inputs, we would have a lot less to go on. So from that standpoint, it's absolutely critical. It also, by having participated in these citizen science efforts, the participants become more aware of what's going on, more educated about it, and they become advocates for it. And a lot of times, elected officials will listen to their constituents more than they may listen to a scientist or an ecosystem manager.
Yeah, I have seen, even with my own experience, that if people are participating in one area of citizen science, they tend to want to participate in other areas as well, even areas that are not in the same realm, terrestrial. With so many wonderful destinations around the world to choose from, a little help can go a long way. Quest Dive Adventures is your premium adventure travel company, offering a wide and diverse selection of destinations to choose from, with dive adventures from the Pacific to the Caribbean and adventure travel from Costa Rica to Africa. Quest Dive Adventures offers packages including flights and accommodations, activities, transfers, diving, and more. Everything to enjoy your perfect vacation. What's your request? So, Kristi, I wanted to ask you, with regard to climate change, how do you see changes occurring in your area affecting that particular environment? As warming occurs, what can we expect to see there?
Well, we're seeing already the very beginning hints of problems with not only warmer water, but in quantities of water. Because of the different temperatures throughout the seasons, sometimes we'll have too much water, flood seasons, and sometimes we'll have tremendous lack of water. So that is certainly changing. But then with respect to the water temperatures, the salmon thrive in cold water. And if it gets much higher than about 65 degrees, they're going to die off. Wow. Or they can't spawn, but they're not going to thrive. And so we need to be taking very serious look and at the water temperatures all along, from the oceans all the way up into the uplands in the forests. And one of the things that we do is we work with private landowners, and we offer what we call our backyard planting program. So if they happen to have salmon bearing creeks or streams on their property, we'll find grant money to go in. We'll remove their invasive species along their stream banks, and we will plant native species from our nursery, and we'll maintain those for 3 years so that they get a chance to establish and not be taken over by those invasive species, so that they will have native trees along their shorelines or their stream banks to provide shade for the water. It also prevents erosion, so that people don't lose their property, and it, as a result, then it impacts the level of sedimentation that gets into the water. So that's one of the things that we do. Another thing that we're concerned about is just the the ocean acidification, where we're worried about the waters getting a little bit more acidic, and we're starting to see that can impact our oyster and shellfish industry. It makes it more difficult for the shells to form, and it makes it more difficult for the larvae of those shellfish to settle. And so we have a number of shellfish hatcheries around our area, and they're constantly doing research to try to find out how can they mitigate the change in acidification of the oceans. And one of the things that they're finding is that if they plant kelp around the perimeters of their shellfish farms, that kelp is such a good oxygenator that it can lower, at least in that particular area, or I'm sorry, it can stabilize the pH in those particular areas so that the shellfish aren't impacted by the changing in acidity.
And just to be clear for the listeners who are unfamiliar with ocean acidification, that is a process that's caused directly because of an uptake of carbon dioxide by the ocean. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, Kristi, I do want to thank you for coming in today. We do appreciate your time, and we want to wish you and the Tillamook Estuary Partnership all the best in your work, and thank you for what you're doing. And we hope that we'll have you back on the show again in the future.
Great. I'd love to.
Thanks so much. Okay, Carson, so let's switch to the news. For those that you are just joining the podcast for the first time, we do have a newsletter that goes out called the 2 Degree C Climate Check, and that's available off our website at 2degreec.org. We just send it out once a week, try and give you 3 headlines out of the news and a nice report coming out of science to try and help us understand just the facts, nothing else, once a week. So 2degreec.org, and it's called the 2 Degree C Climate Check newsletter. So Carson, today I wanted to talk, there were 3 really interesting news headlines that I saw that popped up. The first one is carbon emissions could plummet. The atmosphere will lag behind. What's going on there? Why is that happening?
So we've put a lot of greenhouse gases and such up into the atmosphere for the last 150 or so years, or more, and some of these gases, they can stay up in the atmosphere for decades, even centuries. So going to a zero emission scenario or a net zero, which is where you're sequestering as much as you're emitting, those are only going to address part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that those gases we've already emitted are still up there, changing the climate. So we have to spend some effort on actually capturing some of that carbon and removing it from the atmosphere if we want to accelerate returning the climate to a sort of a pre-industrial state is the ultimate hope. That I don't know that we'd ever get there, but at least a manageable state where climate is not changing as dramatically as it's being projected to do.
So just to be clear, so net zero being announced by any particular organization or by a country is not enough. We need to be doing more.
Correct. They can go to a net zero where they're still emitting greenhouse gases, but their carbon footprint is offset by sequestration, planting forests, carbon capture technologies, other things that remove the carbon from the atmosphere in the same quantities. But right. Again, that's just stopping the input. It's not necessarily addressing the input that's already been put up there.
Right. Well, that kind of leads me to the next headline, which is climate change, a threat multiplier driving migration from Central America. Let's talk about that.
Sure.
What's happening?
Well, the migration has always been there as people seek economic advantages, economic opportunities elsewhere. But as the climate's changing, it's really making matters a lot more dire for a lot of folks who are living in poverty and or close to poverty in other places, such as Central America. And when you throw a changing climate, which is making floods more prevalent, hurricanes a bit stronger, changing their tracks, devastating people's livelihoods down in those regions, they are often left with no alternative but to say we need to find a better place. And that can multiply that decision of uprooting your family and moving.
So we can expect to see this from any equatorial region around the world, not just specifically Central America, as this was referencing. I mean, we can expect this in Africa and all over the East.
We can expect this from just about anywhere where the climate is changing at a significant rate, and causing problems that may destabilize governments. It may destabilize food sources. It may destabilize income generation. So any of those, it's multiplying those effects, and may drive migration from any location, not necessarily just the equatorial regions.
Gotcha. The last one I wanted to talk about, this one surprised me. Was not expecting to see this headline, but it's with regard to climate change in making the universe blurrier. Why is that?
So this is actually a pretty interesting thing, in that these large telescopes that observatories use around the world, they still have to look through the atmosphere, and as humidities increase in a lot of these places, that's those water vapor gases, they scatter light and they bend light around them, and this can cause a difficulty for these telescopes to remain in focus. At the same time, warmer temperatures are going to require a lot more cooling of the mirrors within these telescopes to keep them at the optimal shape, so that the emissions costs of cooling and air conditioning these large telescope arrays may go up dramatically as well. But from the blurring standpoint, the large factor is going to be the amount of water vapor that the telescope has to look through in the atmosphere.
Well, thanks for clearing that up. That certainly helps us figure those headlines out, and hopefully we'll have some new ones to throw at you next week. Thanks very much for today, guys. We'll look forward to the next 2 Degrees C podcast coming up real soon.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the 2 Degrees C Climate Chat. If you have a question you would like answered, a topic for discussion, or would like to be a guest on the show, please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your stories and climate journeys, and if you like what you've heard today, please like, subscribe, and comment wherever you hear your podcasts. Thank you to our sponsors and partners without which this podcast is not possible, with special thanks to Seren Media for producing today's episode. To find out more about our partners, please visit our website. And if you'd like to become a sponsor or partner, please email us at podcast@2degreesc.org.